Before I begin, yes, I made a lot of dumb decisions. Yes, I should have probably called the police, but here it goes anyway. When I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. 1, it was a central location of the house, so I could hear everything. 2, it was equidistant from every exit. One night, at around 2 in the morning, I heard somebody jiggling the front doorknob. It was a slow, cautious jiggle, like they were trying not to be heard. When the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. They then went to the back door, which was also locked. I didn't want to call the police, because I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to be placed into foster care, and I didn't want my parents to get in trouble for neglect. Eventually, the jiggle stopped. I stayed up that night, waiting for them to try other entrances, but nothing happened. A few nights passed, and I awoke to the sound of a door opening upstairs. The doors in the house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open. When you pop them loose, they'd make a loud scrape, pop, shut-up noise. At the time, I would take sleeping pills. It made it hard to fully awaken, and I'd sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. I couldn't determine whether I'd dreamt the sound or whether I'd awoken from it. I started to fall back asleep, and thought I heard the door close like grinding of wood rubbing together. Then, the sound of bed springs screeching, like weight was being shifted. I thought, maybe somebody's homeless, and they thought this was an abandoned house. I was super tired, and I wasn't even sure if I was actually conscious. I fell back asleep, and awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room door, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man crouched over, looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch and grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body and, without turning, backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave, or waited for him to come back down, but I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs, waiting for me. I didn't go back to sleep. I heard nothing, even until sunrise. When I left for school that morning, I questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening. As we approached the house, he said, "Hey, your window is open." I looked, and the room with the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I'd experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house. After finding nothing, I closed and locked the windows. I figured it must have been a hobo. Once they realized somebody lived there, they left. I stayed there that night, but I didn't take sleeping pills. I awoke to the door opening again. This time, I knew it was real. They knew somebody lived there, but they still returned. At this time in my life, I had very little value for my life. I had no fear for death, because I knew where I'd go. I decided I wasn't going to hide in my own house. I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and went upstairs. I yelled something like, "Listen buddy, I'm coming up. Be out by the time I get there." I heard nothing, and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but I found nothing, and the windows were still closed. I checked the downstairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but I still stayed up all that night. I got ready for school the next morning and saw that the window was open again. It occurred to me that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me and bailed. To think that an intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house is spooky. But I'm partially relieved that I hadn't checked. If I'd bent down and come face to face with the man beneath my bed, the story might have ended differently. So, to whoever watched me sleep from the stairs, return the next night and watch me search my house from beneath the bed. Not cool. Let's not meet. So, a couple of weird things have been happening near my house. Whilst I chalked it all up to coincidence at first, I'm starting to feel a little creeped out by it. We had a plumber around in the evening last Thursday. I was the only one at home because my mum had the day he was coming mixed up in her head. So, I wasn't expecting him and didn't hear him knocking at first, as I was playing PlayStation and blasting music out loud in my room. I apologised when I came downstairs and opened the door. He said it was fine and that he actually thought he had heard somebody around the back of the house, and had gone round there to see if anyone was there. He hadn't seen anyone, and came back to the front door. I found this a bit off, but didn't think much of it at the time. Later that evening, I wasn't sure where I'd put my cigarettes. I later found them in my car, but I asked my mum if she'd seen them before I found them. She said to me something like, "Actually, I did see a packet of cigarettes in a weird place. I think they were outside near the back door." I went outside to look, and sure enough, there was an empty packet on the floor near the back door. But I only smoked the fresh burst ones, and this was an empty packet of normal cigarettes. There was also a lot of cig butts on the floor and in a plant pot nearby, and both me and my mum swear they weren't there before that day. I hardly ever smoke at the house, and I never leave the butts out in case the dog eats them. The only explanation we could think of was maybe the dog found the packet in the garden from when some friends came round for a party months ago, but it looked in very good condition, and that doesn't explain the butts. 2 nights later, on the Saturday night, I was in bed at around 11, because I had work at 8 the next day. My mum woke me up suddenly, shouting about the fact that someone had just chucked something at our front window. We peered out the front garden and onto the road and couldn't see anyone, but the garden is dark and there isn't a sensor light at the front. My mum speculated that it could have been ice or a bird, but when we came downstairs, we noticed that someone had chucked an egg at the window. It's possible for it to have been thrown from the pavement, but with the distance and aim, it seems much more likely that it would have been thrown from our front garden. We also found out the next night at a Christmas party that none of our other neighbours had been egged. Somehow it seems weird that someone would go out egging with just one egg. Lastly, on Monday night, I was bringing my dog to bed. She sleeps on my mum's bed, and my mum was asleep, and I heard what sounded like someone shunting into the back door 3 times. It's hard to describe, but it sounded like when someone tries to force a door open when it's stuck, and it really creeped me out. I genuinely thought someone was breaking in, and it didn't sound like the house settling down. It was in quick succession. However, I wasn't sure, and my mum wasn't sure either. My mum was asleep and didn't hear it, but she was creeped out when I told her. Nothing has happened since Monday, but I do feel a bit creeped out. I did wonder if someone was behind all these events. I'll update if anything more happens. Interestingly, a bloke that lives a few doors down is being stalked by an ex, and she got some of her friends to set his van on fire about a month ago. He put CCTV in the lane that runs to the right of our house. He goes to some garages and the back of some of the neighbours' houses, and saw some blokes in balaclavas creeping up there on several occasions. It has been suggested that it could be them, but I doubt it, as I know where he lives and they're only fucking with him, not anyone else. This is probably the most terrified I've ever been in my life, and even as I'm writing this, I'm getting chills real bad. So, I was around 11 or 12 and lived in a pretty nice suburban town in a secluded cul-de-sac. Big house with my mum and dad and one of my older brothers. My oldest brother moved out, and my other brother was in high school. I was just old enough when my parents would let me walk home and stay home by myself until they got home or my brother did. My dad's an accountant, works late nights during tax season, and my mum worked a second job a few nights a month. My brother was involved with the high school radio station and wouldn't get home until late a few nights a week. It just so happened that this was one of those nights where all 3 of them wouldn't get home until late. It was around 5 o'clock when it started getting dark out, and at this time I wasn't afraid of much. We had recently gotten a new home phone with a brand new caller ID feature. Pretty cool to have at the time. While I was watching TV, the phone rang, and the caller ID was 0000000, so I picked it up and heard nothing, then immediately the dial tone. I wasn't too worried at this point because this has happened before. It was getting late and no one had come home yet. Only my parents had cell phones at this point. I didn't want to call and be annoying, asking where they were, and I had no way of calling my brother. About a half hour later, the phone rang again, and the caller ID this time was blank. I picked it up, and this time I heard breathing. Not real heavy, but kinda soft. It was obvious someone was on the other end. I froze for a minute, just listening, terrified. Middle of winter, snowing hard outside where it's pitch black and I'm home alone. I hung up and called my parents right away. Both of them worked about 25 minutes away, hadn't left work yet, and wouldn't be for a while because of bad road conditions. At this point, I'm about ready to piss myself, I'm so scared. I turned on all the lights on the ground floor and refused to go upstairs or in the basement. Soon after, I got another call, and the caller ID was blank again. I didn't pick up, but it went to the answering machine, and all it did again was the soft breathing. That's when I heard a lot of creaking noises, and what sounded like footsteps upstairs. I noped the fuck out of there so fast. grabbing my coat and boots, and I ran outside and waited in the front yard in the snow until my brother came home shortly after. I told him what happened, and we went inside and looked around but didn't see anything. I played him and my parents the machine message later that night, but they told me it was probably a wrong number. To this day I still think about it sometimes, and it always gives me the chills thinking about someone hiding in my house calling me. Has this ever happened to anyone else? Can people really manipulate caller ID numbers and stuff like that?